Hello and welcome to the fourth episode, I believe, of Embedded Insights, which is an excuse for me to do things I love doing and make a video with my mate Harry. This was meant to be all about getting step count up, but clearly you can see I'm still in the boat from the previous episode, so we're not going to get too many steps today. But I don't care because I'm pretty happy surrounded by ducks and swans and geese and no one else, which is my happy place. Anyway, so the purpose of this video is really to talk about tech procurement. It's not the most exciting topic to a lot of people, and certainly I used to work in the tech sort of sales industry. Everyone would hate the procurement people. And as a result, I think it's quite overlooked as a profession and as a discipline, but it's becoming more and more important for a lot of the reasons we've already discussed in previous episodes. Procurement, by definition, is pretty much buying stuff, and that's what people understand it to be, but it's a lot more than that. If you do procurement properly, you buy stuff, but you also understand what you've bought, you manage what you've bought, you maintain a relationship with suppliers, and you set a plan out to buy things cleverly in the future. And that latter point is probably the thing that most people don't do particularly well. Buying stuff is pretty straightforward, and again, from a procurement perspective, in technology especially, it's quite difficult to do because technology changes so quickly. It's normally quite a big spend. It has certain environmental impacts. Getting hold of skills is difficult. So if you're an intelligent procurement technology consultant, you will think about all of those facets rather than just focusing on cost. And the reason why salespeople hate procurement people is because they think it's all about cost and that'll affect their commissions. But realistically, in today's world, procurement's a lot bigger than that. And so buying things in an intelligent way is one aspect of procurement that we all need to focus on. The second point that I made sort of earlier was really all about having a plan to buy something properly. If you're doing all of the stuff I just described, so you're buying things, and looking at cost and environmental impacts and supply chain and those sorts of things, you need to have a plan to make sure you've got enough time to do that properly. Leaving procurement buying to the last minute is really bad because you've over a barrel with the suppliers and you can't ask all the interesting questions like, what are the impacts of actually buying this? You also put yourself under time pressure. So the risk of buying something really quickly is that you don't ask about your requirements, you end up buying the wrong thing, and you spend in some cases millions of pounds on equipment that you can't use or you have to do something different with, and it doesn't meet the need. So planning to buy things, which in a strategy, is what we call category strategy or category management, and that's really, really important to technology procurement especially. Writing a technology category strategy is pretty straightforward. You need to look at what you've got at the moment, you need to write that down, you need to understand what is coming to the end of its contract life, you need to think about some of the commercial aspects. But the more important thing is building a strategy that aligns to your IT stakeholders. So the IT department, the IT manager, or anyone who's got technology needs. So you can have early sight of what you're going to need to buy, and then think about clever things like consolidating requirements. Different people might be buying the same thing. Can you smash that together? Try and understand where the market's going. So if someone's looking to buy a Betamax video recorder, it's probably not the best thing to be buying right now. And so those sorts of things, understanding the plan and building a plan, probably a 3 to 5 year plan, just to give you a sense of direction of what you're doing at a category level is really key. So procurement as an industry, yeah, sort of interesting, sort of not. Technology procurement, yeah, sort of interesting, sort of not. But actually doing it properly makes a massive difference to a company, and that's why I'm so passionate about getting it right. So buying a piece of technology sounds pretty easy, yeah? You rock up, you jump on a well-known website, you type in, I want a computer, and you get one. But in reality, most people are looking to buy something a bit more complex than that. And so understanding exactly what you need is a worthwhile investment at a ridiculous level of detail. If you end up buying the wrong thing, you're going to be in a bit of problems, yeah? So your technology stakeholders need to take responsibility for articulating in real depth what they want to buy. And it's not just what they want to buy, but how's it going to work? What's it going to work with? Where's it going to be located? Are there any regulatory considerations? All these sorts of things you need to think about in depth before you commit any money or even probably start talking to suppliers. Suppliers hate you wasting their time. They think they're very important, and therefore they don't really want to get to a position where you articulate a few hours of requirements and they realise right at the very end that they can't do something. So my view would be, step one has got to be writing down your requirements, getting someone to detail not just a few bullet points, but I want this service in this location, delivered in this time frame, going to sit in this environment, it's going to interface with these other systems, it's going to be regulatory compliant to these industry compliance points, all these sorts of things. If you haven't got those written down, don't even start talking to suppliers. Now, you might need to rely on suppliers to build some of those questions, but you need to think about what's important to you before you start that supplier conversation. Otherwise, you'll just get sold to. And that's probably the worst scenario. You don't necessarily want to be the recipient of information without knowing what your position on that information in first. I'm going to have to stop you there, Harry, because there's some beautiful swans flying over there. Look at the wingspan on that. Isn't that amazing? So covered off requirements gathering, really important, quite passionate about it. Then you're into the phase of, okay, how do I start talking to a supplier? And that's not massively complex either. Jump on Google, try and understand which supplier you should talk to based on your search results in Google, and that's all very easy, isn't it? But it's not. From a supplier perspective, before you start talking to them, you need to understand what you want from a supplier, not in technical requirements, but also commercial. So, checking a credit check of a supplier, making sure they've got the right capability, making sure they hold the right accreditations, making sure that they've got the right case studies and references in your particular industry. All these things are really relevant points that you want to try and get through desk-based research before you talk to the supplier. Because as soon as you pick the phone up to the supplier, you're in their black book, you're on their CRM, you'll be getting phone calls every 5 minutes. Where's my order? Where's my order? And we need to avoid that as much as we can, because it's a waste of our time as well as the supplier's time. So the talking to a supplier phase is pretty straightforward, and that's all, once you've done your desk-based research, you engage with the suppliers, and that's the really easy bit. Talk to suppliers, the ones you want to talk to, articulate your requirements that you've perfectly articulated, and they'll just go away and write you a proposal. And because your requirements are so clear-cut, the proposal will come back, the price will be what the price will be, you can do a bit of negotiation, and that's where you are. You're in the process of buying something. The final phase is contracts. And again, most people hate contracting. They're complicated, big legal documents, they cover off a lot of things. But from a procurement perspective, it's really important that you consider all of the main risks to your business associated with that thing that you're buying. And in technology terms, there's a lot of risks. Many of you remember over the last few years, we've all been focused on GDPR and data privacy. And certainly when you're buying things like the cloud, you need to understand where your data is going to be stored, because you can get yourself into quite a big fine territory if you've got the wrong approach to data privacy. But even basic things like hardware, understanding some of the manufacturing processes, understanding the provenance of where they're coming from, making sure that you've got the right details around exactly how that all hangs together, and putting that in a contract. So if there is a problem with that hardware or that service going forward, you've got some vehicle by which you can control the situation, and you've got probably predefined processes you go through to go through that dispute process or understand where you're taking it. Now, again, legals, if the contracts are right, you should really write them, stick them in a drawer, and hopefully never have to use them. But if you do have to use them, you need to make sure they're correct, and they consider all of the risks, commercial risks and operational risks associated with what you're buying. But where it goes a little bit wrong for most procurement people is that's not the end of the story. You've got your contract, you stick it in the drawer, sort of interesting. But what you need to do really well is manage your supplier relationship. And this is where most procurement people fall foul. They buy something, they've done a really good deal, they've saved loads of money, and then the supplier goes one way and they go the other. But if you lose track of what that supplier is doing, it's a massive risk in its own right. And even though the contract will protect you from some of those risks, having a clear understanding of whether a supplier's got financial issues, whether they've got operational issues, oh, my leg's gone dead, whether they've got issues with other clients, all those sort of things will give you an informed position so you can plan for a change of supplier if you need to do that. But it's all about managing that relationship. And the relationships historically in procurement have been very buy a supplier, beat you up on price, that's it. I'm a strong believer that you need a proper relationship with the suppliers at a relationship level. You need to get on with them. You need to make sure they've got the right cultural fit for this company. You need to make sure that they're the right sort of people to represent your brand, because if they're doing strange things in their supply chain and someone gets hold of that, that could affect your company perception. So although you've got the buying stuff, the requirements gathering, you've got the contracting phase, please don't forget the relationship phase, because that's probably the most important. If you do that right, you are laughing. So I've just talked on my soapbox about supplier management and relationships, and I think that's really important, as you might be able to tell. But actually those relationships have got to be in context. And I previously mentioned something called a category strategy. And this is really the central pillar of all technology procurement. Your category strategy, which is primarily focused on technology, needs to understand what you've got in your base, what contracts you've got, what suppliers you've got. You probably need to assess each of those suppliers to how important they are to your business. And normally you do that in a tiering system. So, tier 1 is really important, tier 4 less important. And you get to a stage where you have a plan where you're engaging with the suppliers selectively based on their importance to your business. And if you can build relationships with the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers substantially, then you should be in a position where your business has very low risk of supplier engagement and supply chain generally. So that category strategy will define what you've got and what suppliers you've got, what contracts are coming up to an end, but also what levels of spend, what sort of suppliers they are, how important they are, and then you've got that relationship mapped out. But the other thing you also need to factor into a category strategy, what's going on in the market. As previously mentioned, if you're a massive buyer of Betamax technology, you're probably going to be a little bit stuck if you weren't aware that VHS was about to take over. And the technology category strategy approach really should factor in what's going on in the overall market. So most of you will be aware that there's a big focus on artificial intelligence at the moment, and automation, and sustainability, and all these sort of big ticket items which we're covering off in these embedded insights things. You need to take a position on all of those and try and think, okay, so artificial intelligence is coming, I currently buy this service from this supplier, it's expiring in 18 months' time. Is there an alternative that I could look at, working with the supplier or not, to automate some of those processes and drive efficiencies into my business? And having an understanding of where technology is heading is a critical part of the skill set that a technology category manager will need to be able to articulate that and work with his business stakeholders, his IT department, to make sure that you're preempting the changes in the market such that you can cope with them with enough room to actually do something about it. And a couple of the sort of key things that we're currently sort of facing are artificial intelligence, I mentioned. Cloud is still a thing and it will continue to be a thing. I think the pricing for that is changing and we need to get our head around that. I think broader supply chain needs some real thought. Clearly the war in Ukraine has caused a lot of problems with supply chain, as has Brexit, as has people driving boats to the side of the Suez Canal over the last few years. There's a whole raft of reasons why getting hold of your goods has been difficult. And I think going forward, it worries me a little bit with the situation in China and Taiwan. And those sorts of things could massively affect what you're doing. So you probably need to be thinking at a category strategy level about how am I going to deal with a war in Taiwan if that was unfortunately to happen, environmental change, flooding in major manufacturing units, making sure you've considered all of the aspects that could go wrong, such as you've got a plan for them, or you've got an approach, or you're working with suppliers to build that approach, and you're not going to expose your business to that sort of risk. So, these are the main facets of technology procurement: buying stuff, so making sure you've got requirements correct, engaging with the supplier market, getting your contracts done, and then managing the relationship. And all of those things can be tied up in a category strategy such that you've got a clear plan that you can talk to people about and get to a position where you know what you're doing in the context of your business. So sort of summary of where we are really, technology procurement is a lot more complicated than just buying stuff. So what do you do to make sure you're prepared to buy stuff intelligently? Well, I've mentioned category strategies, and that's quite sort of interesting, and it's a bit ethereal, but fundamentally, if you do it right, you're doing it well. The key point is you need to have the data to support that. And a lot of businesses don't bother writing down their contract detail, their supplier lists, their spend, all those sorts of things that you need as part of a category strategy. So step one has got to be get the core data about your current estate, the suppliers you've got, what they do for you, when their contracts expire, those sorts of things, and start documenting some of the facets of those supplier engagements, such as risks. Just understand your estate really well, and that's all about having the data. That's the most important thing. The second point is equally as important, but probably comes next, is engaging with your business stakeholders. So understanding who you need to talk to in the business, drawing a stakeholder map, making sure that you understand, this person's important for this specific project, this person's overall important for all aspects of IT, and making sure you're marking those people so they understand what your strategy is from a procurement perspective, and it aligns to what their IT strategy is in the context of technology. There's no point in you saying, I'm going to renew that contract in 2 years' time if that contract is null and void because the technology strategy has changed. So it's really easy to do these sort of things, and there's some very credible trade bodies around that support this. I personally am a member of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, which is CIPS, and they have a lot of very useful collateral on their website that articulates how you do a proper procurement process generically around all categories and also technology specifically. But also there's plenty of other information sources out there, such as analysts like Gartner, there's procurement consultants such as myself, who can help you build out all these strategies and all these services and make sure you're engaged with your business correctly so you're operating in an efficient way and preparing for any risk.